So I think we're supposed to start off by folks introducing themselves.
Yeah, and do you have the clicker?
No.
Because it'll have a...
That would help me, right? I think it's going to magically happen. My perspective taking is poor.
Just like everybody's name and then individually.
Excellent. So, okay, there we go. So I am going to have you guys introduce yourselves. So Julie?
Great. My name is Dr. Julie Antilla. I'm a professor here at Seattle Pacific University. I have one child. His name is Joaquin. He's an 8-year-old. And my husband and son and I moved from California about 2.5 years ago and we live on the east side.
Great, thank you. And Jenny?
I'm Jenny Rowley, and we have 3 kids, and I'm married to my husband. And we have 2 boys on the spectrum. Our daughter's the oldest, she's 9. Son Alex, he's 7, and Andy is 5. And we live in Seattle and moved here from California about 4 years ago.
And I know that, am I going to ask later about the strengths the kids, or should we? You're welcome to say what your kids' strengths are and greatest challenges too.
Okay, jumping back to Joaquin. Joaquin is an avid drawer. He loves drawing logos, especially movie logos or company logos, and is not into crayons very much, but loves markers, and is fascinated with finding bumpers, little commercials or trailers on the internet.
Awesome. And Jenny, how about your boys?
Alex's strengths are he's socially motivated, but conversely his challenge is maintaining the relationships. Andy's is the eagerness to please. He's highly motivated by positive reinforcement, but his challenges are with unexpected routines and his rigidity and the changes in schedule.
Got it. And Ellie?
My name is Eliana Ladish Orlick, daughter of Dr. Felice Orlick. I have a brother, Jonah, who is socially not impaired, I would say, but does struggle in that sort of spectrum. But geographically and mathematically and most school subjects, he is brilliant.
Great. That kind of defines him.
Hello, I'm Nipana, and my son Skanda is 15, and we are a family of 3. He has one sister, Nadia. We had another sister who passed away, and their father passed away as well. He's in his first year of high school without being in a special therapeutic school for the first time ever. He's doing really well. He's very friendly. But he has a tendency to not moderate his volume in the classroom when he's frustrated. So he's in the regular classes and then he starts to yell. So that's his challenge, but he is very helpful, empathetic. He actually volunteered as an aide for the Gift of Time respite on the east side for 5 to 11-year-olds on the spectrum. He was extremely helpful.
Wow, great. That's good. So what we're going to do for the rest of the panel is the question is going to come up on the screen, but I will read it to you, okay? And then we'll go through one at a time. But so the first question, and Ellie, I'm going to change this a little bit for you. Many parents describe getting an autism diagnosis as emotionally difficult. So was it an emotionally difficult time for your family, and how?
So Joaquin was diagnosed right before he turned 2 years old. And while it was not difficult for us, it was very surprising for me and a little bit humiliating because I was a school principal and I was in my 6th year of being a school principal, where I had on my campus the High Functioning Autism Center for our school district, and I still did not recognize that my son had autism. And now in retrospect, I can say I was used to working with kids ages 6 and above, and how autism was displaying in my infant son was different. But I remember my husband giving me a call. I was at work one day, and my husband had been taking my son to therapy because of a physical disability. And he called up and he said, "You won't believe it. Our OT said she's pretty sure Joaquin has autism." And I just remember being so surprised by that. And I had to really start to think about what we were seeing, what traits we were seeing with Joaquin. And then it kind of dawned on me like, oh, okay, yes, this might make sense. And so it wasn't a difficult period. We were already receiving PT and OT for my son's arthrogryposis. So we just picked up an IFSP with regional center, and the transition was fairly easy.
How about you, Jenny?
The process for our family was pretty emotionally draining and frustrating. For my older son, we suspected things were going on with him for a couple years, and at the time we were still not aware of the symptoms of autism, and so we were constantly told that what we were seeing was considered typical. And during that time of a couple years, we made the move up to Seattle, not knowing what was available. But even upon moving here, we were told that we were overreacting. And so after about a year, we were called for my first son to be seen for a screening, and then told again to wait for another 6 to 9 months. But during that time, we were so hyper-focused on my first son that my younger son was in birth through 3, and through a random screening, we were told that they suspected that he was on the spectrum, and so that was surprising to us. So there was a whole range of confusion, doubt, guilt, what have you. And so immediately we were able to get them both seen within a couple weeks, and then they were diagnosed within a week apart of each other.
Mm-hmm. Wow, a long process.
Yes.
And Ellie, I'm going to answer this a little bit, and then maybe what we'll have you talk about is when you first realized Jonah was different than other kids. Does that sound okay? So our story for Jonah is that Chris and I are both pediatric neuropsychologists, and I would say in our house there was a low tolerance for flapping, right? Low tolerance for repetitive behaviors, but our path was long, like many other parents, where in my lab people were saying there's no way Jonah can have autism because he's so social. But so Jonah didn't get his diagnosis until 6 years of age, and we felt when he was little like we were struggling to keep him with us. I don't know if that was your experience. We felt like it was a fight against the perseveration. It's like I felt like I was fighting tooth and nail. And even when I got the diagnosis, I was afraid that was going to be the rest of my life, fighting against that perseveration. And as a professional, I wondered, wow, if I had gotten him the diagnosis earlier, what would it be like? But we did access great services, but again, we were really fortunate. This is what we do. I was at the UW Autism Center at the time, and I literally walked across the bridge, went to Jennifer at the time, Annabelle, who used to be the principal there, and said, "Can you find a place for Jonah?" And he was in next week. And then Ellie became a typical peer soon after. So I get it. Like, it was frustrating, it was long, and not knowing was hard. It's still hard, right?
Yes.
So Ellie, what are your thoughts?
I can't necessarily remember when I first realized Jonah was different, but I definitely realized when everyone was doing one thing, he would do it a little bit differently. And some of the things, the way that kids would learn, he would learn a bit differently. And when I would go outside, like for recess per se, everyone would be doing something different, and he wouldn't usually be with someone else. And when people would hit hard on him emotionally and never physically, which was a good coincidence, I would always try and step in, step up for him, see what I could do to not fix him and make him normal, but to make people see that he is different. You have to know this. Like, being autistic, like I saw one of the little speech bubbles on the wall, is autism is not bad, it's just different. And what makes me amazed and super happy is one time, I can't remember who, I wish I could, someone in my class in 4th grade said, "Can you tell me a little bit more about your brother so I can better understand his autism?" My jaw dropped. I was amazed. People actually notice that he's different and they know what this is. And knowing how someone has this and what it is can make you better understand what it's like to have them as your sibling, as your child, as your parent, as your peer, as your person in the same class, school, building, room. Just helps you better understand it.
Thanks. Nipana?
So I wouldn't say that getting the diagnosis was emotionally difficult, because my son was who he was. The diagnosis didn't change who he was, but it came at a time where my whole life was falling apart because of who he was. He had been sent from mainstream to a behavior program, which he pretty much went on strike, and I had to do a lot of advocating and mediation with OSPI, and school district had to send him to a therapeutic school. I had lost my job because they suspended him all the time, and I had to keep leaving work. We had lost housing, everything, it was just falling apart. And then because I had the diagnosis, I could make everybody supportive. So the emotional part, I'd been waiting probably a year for the evaluation anyways, but it didn't change how I supported him at home, it just changed how schools did.
Right. So for you, it was the thing, and it sounds like for everybody, having the diagnosis made a difference in a positive
And
way
how
for
other people-
what you could access and how other people perceived your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks. I would agree. And that's what you were saying too, Ellie. So the next question is, parents often say that it's a real challenge to take their child out in public because people who don't know autism may misunderstand their behavior and stare or judge or say unkind things. Have you had experiences like this, and can you share one example? Julie?
So I have one big example, but I have commonly occurring similar examples to each other, not to the big example. What often happens when Joaquin and I are out in public is that strangers will want to greet and engage, and they will, yet they become confused when Joaquin doesn't respond right away. And I oftentimes debate with myself how much I should broker the situation. Do I let the pause go on? Do I explain it's taking him a little bit to process, he will respond to you eventually, or do I answer for my child? And that is probably the most frequently occurring experience in public. Our most dramatic experience in public happened in California. We were receiving great PRT services, pivotal response training. And our therapist and I had taken Joaquin, he was probably about 3 years old at the time, taken him out to Costco, and we were working on language development. When we returned to our car, and Joaquin was in the front of the cart in Costco, we were prompting him to give us any verbal response that he wanted out of the cart and into the car. And he was struggling with this, and he was whining and a little bit of crying. And someone drove by and they rolled down the window and said, just put your kid in the car. He's exhausted, he's frustrated. And we said, thank you, but we're working on this. And the person drove around one more time and then parked a little bit away and called the police. And the police came over, and which on the one hand I was surprised, but on the other hand I was really thankful, because if we were abusive parents abusing our child in the Costco parking lot, I'm glad to know that the police would come and rescue our child. But we explained to the officer what was going on, and they said okay, and they went over and talked to the other person, and things were fine.
That's a really magnanimous way to see that, I gotta say. So, Jenny?
I think Julie said it really well, just overall. It's how much how much do I want to engage with well-meaning observers, I guess. And it just depends on what, it varies. It can depend on what goals we have as a family and what we're working on and how much stamina I have in engaging with them, or how much we want to work in trying to make a change in a behavior. A couple of weeks ago, we were walking across the street, just a crosswalk light, and it was the 5 of us. And sometimes just the idea of all of us going somewhere together is scary. Or my husband will go with 2 of them, and I'll go with 1. There's a lot that comes into play. But we were walking across the street, and my son was happy and jumping on the crosswalk lines. And for us, we know that he's working really hard to do that and hold our hand at the same time, so we're excited. But there was somebody that just made a comment for whatever reason and said that our son was being rude and disrespectful to us, and how come we couldn't handle him, and told him that he should understand how lucky he is to even have a mom, because a lot of people don't. It was very weird. And so I was trying to stay connected with my son to get him across the street and still hold my hand, because that's a big challenge and celebration in itself. But it took a lot for me not to become combative, or I wouldn't. But I mean, yeah, and so there's a lot of that internal mama bear struggle of trying not to.
Yeah.
But it happens often.
I'm notorious for the mama bear. Ellie?
When I go in public and people will give Jonah a weird look, what I can see in like the glimmer of their eye is weird kid, not weird kid doing the wrong thing at the wrong place, just weird average teenage kid doing something weird. Because my friends and I will do plenty of weird abnormal stuff in public, and so will everyone else, because everyone will eventually do something in public that, well, if people see this, Doug must think I'm weird, because that has happened. But a traumatic experience, not traumatic, but a scary experience that has happened for me and my brother was, I think this was at my old elementary school, which means I was in 2nd grade, which means he was in 3rd, I think, I was only in 1st, he was only in 2nd, was this kid that I knew, not great, but I knew of him. We had been in the same room before, we had talked to each other, knew each other's names, and I saw Jonah with his head down, someone just being absolutely rude to him, so I'm like, dude, leave him alone, he has problems, you don't have to do this to him. So he looks at me like, okay, like, he didn't say anything, but he just gave me this look of, I am sorry, I didn't know, because I don't think he knew that Jonah had autism. And if you know that, then going in public, you can explain that to someone else, like, he has a disability, it's not his fault, because that person didn't know they were just doing the wrong thing, and it happens. And then the next day I saw them talking together, laughing, sitting together, and it just shows things can really turn around if you just explain that someone has autism, it's not bad, it's not wrong, they're just different, they can be weird, and it's in public, it just happens that they'll do something that a normal person wouldn't, and someone might notice it and hit hard on that, and you just kind of gotta fix it, pick them up, make them feel like it's okay, tell the other person it's not their fault, they have something that's just different about them that will make them act different or out.
Well, from a pretty young age, I'd say 9, 10 months old, and I started taking my son to Jamboree playtime. He was different. I knew that, so I just stopped really listening to what people in public say, just kind of tune them out and do what I have to do. But one experience that we had a few years ago was my youngest really wanted a Chuck E. Cheese birthday party. And I said, okay, but she invited her whole class, and they all showed up. This never happened to me before. So we had like 30 kindergartners plus a few assorted parents, and then my second grader and 3rd grader, or is it 3rd and 4th grader? My son was, I think, 4th grade, yeah. And Chuck E. Cheese is pretty tight. When you back your chair up, you hit somebody. And somebody took his root beer from the right side, tried to tell him his root beer was on the left side, and he dumped his root beer, and he tried to get out, and he backed up into these other people who got the manager, complained about this horrible kid. The manager ignored them and helped us get out of there. So that was a big dramatic moment, but I really don't pay attention to what other people say in public.
It's a good idea.
Just can't.
Yeah.
Just like my son has his sensory bubble of some sort, I have mine.
All right. Those were all great answers. So where do you find support, and what do you do to prevent feeling isolated? So just if you could share some specifics, that'd be great. Julie?
Yeah, so I would say that our primary support, because it gives me the most sense of typicality for my son, is our church. We go to a very big church, and the reason we picked our church is because they advertise that they work with kids with special needs in their kids program. And so when we moved here, we selected it, and he is in the regular Sunday school classes, and they've never had a problem with that. They've never asked us not to have him involved. They provide extra support for him, and he does very well there. So I find a lot of support in that. There have been times over the last year or so that we have, my husband and I have struggled preparing for IEPs, coming up at Joaquin School, and so I've relied on my colleagues in the School of Education who work in special ed, and I've found support from them. And just recently, we enrolled my son in the Aspiring Youth program that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and he absolutely loves that. So we're starting to build some social support for him with peers.
That's great. Jenny?
Where do we find support?
Where do you find support?
Our family, we try to diversify. I mean, autism is such a big part of our life, but it's not the only part of our life too. So while we have a huge network in the autism community, we make sure that my husband and I, we make it a priority to have our own time together away, whether it's a monthly date night and whatnot. And I think in the beginning that was something that we found lacking, because it was autism and any medical condition can take up a lot of your energy. So we wanted to make sure that we supported that. And then also we try to include our kids in as many activities that my daughter, because she's the typical daughter, and we try to include our boys and partner with whatever outing or school or the Y or church. We just develop partnerships with those resources and just try to naturally weave our family in there. And if people are not aware of that, we can provide material or talk to groups if they're open to it. And so we become that resource for people in our network.
Cool. I know it's hard to find those times as a couple, like with your partners and with your other kids, to have quality time. So, Elsie?
When I needed to find support, if I just needed a break from having a sibling with autism, then I thought of something else I could do, just take a step back. But what I really feel like kind of helped me let go, try something new, and kind of, if I must put this in this way, feel like free, was I tried all sorts of different sports. I did soccer, gymnastics, cheerleading, and those things I met a whole new bunch of people who, a few people had same scenarios, like siblings or classmates with a disability, and I could talk to them about that. And just being with other people has always made me feel better, happier, like knowing there's someone else out there who's a lot like me, who's struggling with someone else who's a lot like Jonah. And it's just really cool to relate to someone like that, but always just taking a step back from it, just stepping a little bit away from it can always make you feel like you have time to collect yourself again before you can re-step into that world where someone is struggling.
Nipna?
Well, I find most of my support online, much easier than scheduling things. Just pop on when I can, how much I want to. My home is a pretty mellow place. I don't think any of us have much of a need to be social creatures. We just hang out and read or play games with each other. But I also have been a member of the North Shore Families Group. It's out of Shoreline and Bothell, and it's different abilities, not all spectrum, but we go camping and have picnics and go to the park, go on hikes, go to the pool up in Molly Terrace. Different things. I maybe participate twice a year. But we've known the same people over the years. I know their kids, so it's nice to see the same faces. But my family doesn't live here. It's just us.
So just like kids with autism are like many different penguins or families, and how you find your support and respite is different. You know, some is within your own home, you know, making time for your partners and your other kids, and then community. Just different definitions. Right? So these are some, did we have other questions, Bev? Did I miss something? Okay, all right. So I think this is a good question, but what have you learned about yourself from having a child or a sibling with autism? Julie?
So the hardest thing for me to learn, and I'm still in the process of learning it about myself, is I find that I struggle with a sense of helplessness in working with schools and frustration because I spent 16 years in the public school system as an educator and as an administrator, and I still feel helpless in going into IEP meetings. And I, as a principal, sat through literally hundreds of IEP meetings over the years. And now to be on the other side of the table as a parent, especially being in a different state than where I had worked in public schools, not knowing all of the specifics of the district, of what options are available, but knowing best case scenarios and worst case scenarios, I find that my mind can play tricks with me of, oh my goodness, we're gonna go into this IEP and they're probably going to suggest this, and how do I prepare for that? I've also learned how desperately reliant on my husband I am. He has been a stay-at-home dad since Joaquin was born, and like you were talking about, when you have a child who is being suspended from school or you're receiving calls about for me, my child struggles with physical aggression. And so getting calls from school, knowing that I have my husband at home who can in 3 minutes be at the school site if needed, makes it possible for me to do my job here because we live about 40 minutes away from here.
Yeah. How about you, Jenny?
I think the most thing that I learned about myself was to trust my instincts, and that I was going to be the best advocate for my children. I think because of the road that we had in getting services, I think it caused me to doubt a lot of what I saw. And so once we were supported, I was slowly able to start rebuilding that trust in myself that I lost. And I really saw that once we accepted it, even before the diagnosis, we accepted that, you know, our children are going to have challenges, and we need to figure out what those, the best way to support them were, whether or not we were confirmed by a professional. And so I think once our family, my husband and I, accepted that, we were just able to be present with our children and to see, like, what is it that you really need right now? Whether that was just, you talked about the love. I mean, it's really allowed them to just show up and be themselves at home and support them for what they need, and then, you know, just kind of scale it back and say, okay, right now you need a hug or you just need space. And so we've been able to intimately be involved with them that way. So I've learned to trust myself.
Yeah. Mindfulness, like, just becomes a natural thing. out of having kids on the spectrum. Ellie?
I've learned that sometimes you're not always going to get to be able to do exactly what would be normal. That sometimes you're going to have to tweak it a little bit because they're not always going to work straight through it, like maybe sound or population is going to maybe have them struggle a little bit. And what I just keep thinking about is something that I came up with is there's two different ways that autistic and non-autistic people think. Non-autistic people are a lot like cars. You come up to an intersection and there's 3 ways to go. It's really simple to choose a different way. You just turn, or you turn the other way, or you just go straight. But autistic people are a lot like trains. You're only on the track. You have to follow that track. You can go forwards and backwards, but you gotta follow that track. And if you wanna start something new, then you have to stop the train, build a new track, and start following that one. And if you wanted them to come into the same scenario, let's say, then you'd have to have them cross over each other. The train track would have to come over the road. And when that happens, all the cars would have to stop. You have to let the train go through. You have to stop what's happening and let the autistic person just kind of collect his or herself in the scenario. And once that happens, the train can have gone by, the cars can then pass, and it just works. But when you think about it, they're both locomotives, they're both vehicles, and when you think about it, we're all people. We all think, we all feel, we all have trouble with some things, we all are better at some things, and you just kind of got to think. We all think differently, and autistic people just think a little more differently than different. They're just special in their own way. They're just a whole new category, but we're all still people.
That's good. So I have learned from my kids to take their ideas and put them into research. Like that peer idea came from my son for how to choose peers. So, Nipna?
No. Well, the autism part of the question, but like both of the parents here, I've learned that I am the expert in my son. All of the other experts at the IEP table, at the therapy, they are the expert in their field, but I'm the expert in my son. And therefore, I'm his best advocate, and I'm teaching him to advocate for himself. And I've really, really learned to trust that about me. I'm not worried about speaking up, and I don't go away, and I'm not confrontational, and I just keep showing up. And they have to do something because I'm the expert in my son. So as far as life at home, I've learned mindfulness, just it is what it is. It's not gonna be any different, and we just live our life the best we can with what we have. And I don't have any disappointments about the future because I no longer have any preconceived ideas that it needs to be a certain way. It's just the way it is, and we find our strengths and try to go from there.
Well said. Well, thanks to you guys. We wanted to give the audience, did I get all the questions, Bev? We wanted to give the audience a chance to ask you guys some questions. Are you guys okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know you're probably getting tired. I need to, there we go. She's gonna walk around with this.
So what would you say as a parent? I work at a church and we're developing kind of our special needs program right now for our kids. And what would you say as a parent if you were to walk into more of like a non-clinical environment, like a church or maybe a place that your kids would go to once a week or a couple times a week? What would be your top priorities as a parent that you're looking at to be like, this is where I want my kid to be at or be a part of, or I feel comfortable leaving my kid for an hour or something like that?
So I'll start, because when we moved here, we went church shopping, and I looked online a lot. So an online presence of inclusiveness and acceptance, I think, is very important. And for me, having my child in the regular Sunday school classes with typical peers, knowing that the staff will provide extra staffing in that classroom for my son, those were all very important considerations.
We also did shopping for churches, but I think what I look for in those programs is that the idea that the staff is aware of the special needs, specifically in this conversation, autism, so that they are flexible with understanding that because they're not there every day, that there has to be some type of schedule. And so to understand that, and that could be a challenge, that may or may not be a challenge for a child, but just to know that whether or not, however they show up, that they're accepted, no matter in what place they're in, is important. Because I know that for my kids, when they are in those programs, it's only once a week, and I think because the schedules are predictable, they've been able to thrive in there. But then also getting the staff to be aware of that inclusive environment is important, because if it was just me complaining that it was my kid not being seen, then it would feel like I was against everyone, and that would make me want to come back, I guess. I don't know.
So for me, it's not the space, it's not the tools. I could modify, provide those. It's the language that the other church members use. It's the ideas that the behavior is not a choice, there are no punishments, there's no negative consequences. This is just accept the child for who they are, and that's the most important to me.
Ellie, did you have any comments? It would be more.
Hi, I'm a grad student here at SPU, but I also have a sibling with autism, so this was a great panel to hear from. I think in my family's experience, but also even just getting to be in higher education, a lot of times what I've heard from institutions and groups when asked about accessibility and inclusion and understanding for persons with disabilities, the answer is usually, well, if the need presents itself, then yeah, of course, we'd love to talk to you about that. And that's a really great intention, I think, but I also think that it puts a lot on the family to do that upfront work, which you all are already doing for your children and for your siblings, of like looking out and seeing what's good. So I guess my question is, what to you, what have you seen, what concrete things have you seen, whether it's from communities or from family members or churches or institutions or clubs that really signify and communicate inclusion and belonging? What does that look like for you guys?
I had a nice experience with a group that was a multicultural group, and a lot of their just families happened to be special needs, and they would interview and hire different activities directors, like Afro-Caribbean drumming, and the instructor didn't care if the kids wandered off, and so it was really nice to find that through Outdoors for All.
Just a plug for Outdoors for All. We've also worked with them, participated with them, and have found that to be a great organization to work with. But as far as needing to do the work at the beginning, I do think that remains in most settings. I think it's probably so inherent in how we operate that it is just like we want to prime for our children to prepare them, we want to prime the general population also when we have our kids involved in organizations and activities.
I would say One thing that came up was partnering with the schools, because we know that it's, for us, we know that it's going to be a long-term relationship, and sometimes there's just not so much positive information out there. But again, it comes back to the acceptance for our family. We knew that for our boys that there aren't very many options, I guess, even whether or not we go private or wherever. There's not very many options for schooling or homeschooling, or, you know, yeah. And so we embraced it and just have worked with our school in trying to understand what their plan is for inclusion. And if, fortunately, we've been able to, they're open, the staff is open to getting more information because they know that there's a need coming up. And so they've created a inclusion program for parents. And so, but it's also a burden on us because we're left to educate. And so again, it's that embracing of, okay, well, it has to start somewhere. And so we're trying to learn to build that network. And then also, one more, sorry. Also, we've been able to partner and find other families who've been in the inclusion programs ahead of us that may or may not still be at the schools, and then just to ask them what has worked for them and not, so that we can kind of go back into the school and just kind of work with that, because every family needs different things. I mean, our family is not like the poster children for, I mean, nobody's family is. Everyone's needs are different, and it may not work for, what works for us may not work for everyone, so.
Oh, I just wanted to add on to that. I feel like the schools now ask me what to do, how to relate to my son, and I know that's actually strange for a lot of parents. They don't go to the IEP meeting and get asked what to do, but I guess they've learned over the years that when I give them suggestions, they work. So now they ask me, they're the ones who know how to create that document, and I'm the one who gives them the information. So yeah, I feel pretty responsible, and kind of like the burden is on me for sure. But I'm glad I'm in control, I guess is the right word.
We have a letter, just to share with you guys, that we send to every teacher before Jonah starts class. And we modify it year to year, but we write that letter. It's a strongly worded letter. Please just email me if you want to copy. It's a great letter.
So what I do at IEP meetings is I bring an 8x10 photo of my son, and I start with one of his jokes.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like, this is what the meeting's about, not your job, your promotion, your budget. It's right here.
You should start with a geography question.
You should.
I said we should start with a geography question.
Ellie, do you have a comment? Okay. I said we should start with a geography question. Chris and I actually have a letter that we share with all of Jonah's teachers before school starts, and we actually resend that letter a number of times a year, which has been our experience. And we, like you, get asked, what should we do with your son? We still get that question frequently. So, and we answer.
I just love that they listen.
I'm glad they listen too. I would not say they always listen, but they listen. They work very hard. Jonah's not an easy guy sometimes. So are there other questions from the audience?
I can actually start. I don't need a microphone. I'm a teacher voice. I actually teach high school severely autistic students, and I believe in taking them out in the community because I believe you guys have had to put up with so much of that story you guys told of the person calling the police on you, and so I believe it's my job to be that person they're staring at so that you get to enjoy your child. So what would be the thing that you would love for me to help either your child or the community to help you better be inclusive in your community?
It depends on the students.
In general,
I mean, I'm just thinking about it. My son hates to be outside. It's just too much. Other students, he's in his peer group and his program, they love to be outside. So it really, really depends on your students. You know, the park sounds like a great idea, but my son would love to. My son likes to help people, so you know, if you took him to the senior center and helped them get on Facebook or something, he'd think that was awesome. But maybe other students in his peer group would hate that, so it's like, he doesn't like to help with animals. But you know, you never know.
A lot of times it will depend on what the autistic person is struggling with. Like for some people, it's loud noises. For some people, it's having a lot of people around them, or they also have a phobia along with that. And really, you just have to have a scenario that almost nothing could like go wrong, or like something bad could really affect the way that they're thinking. Just like a place where it's not an area where people with autism could really struggle and freak out and have panic attacks and that sort of scenario.
But I'm going to take it out into everyday normal community activities that you may want to do too, so that you get to do it together.
Then you might want to do it with things that they are normally accustomed to, or people that they already know, like I guess you're probably already doing. And you just want to kind of work it in slowly, a lot like said Preely, is you don't want to just throw them into the pit of snakes. The snakes will just bite them.
For example, in Bellevue, they like a lot of kids in my son's peer group, they love Crossroads Mall because there's like the T, and there's just this long way to walk, and the stores aren't very crowded, and it's very contained and geometric, and they just go and hang out. No rules, they can be loud or quiet. So I don't know, I think they like to have some sort of containment, some sort of structure, but you have to find their interests.
I'm only speaking from my kids because they're younger, but so for example, like you said, Starbucks, and my two boys, like one, he wouldn't be interested, who knows what he'll be interested in a few years, but now, if that was something that I wanted him to do, I would have to provide him with some kind of motivator, like, okay, well, when you get on there, or when we get to Starbucks, you can log on to my iPad, or we can I don't know, we don't do that. But not the iPad, but the Starbucks. And, but then with my other son, he's very obsessed with sorting trash. So, because he learned it at school, and so he knows compost, recycling, and trash, or what's it?
Yeah,
Trash? Yeah. And but he would be successful at Starbucks clearing our table, and so he would feel useful.
But maybe teach them not to clear somebody else's table.
Yeah, well, that could be its own challenge in itself. But so I think providing them with tailoring their own.
You may be able to take with you wherever you're going.
Yeah, or like them knowing in whatever social situation that you're going to, that they specifically with the challenges for each student, they have a job, so they feel useful.
You're at high school level?
I am.
So would they be interested, or are at the level where they could try to make change?
No, my students are lower than that. We actually use Starbucks first. Starbucks actually donates the coffee when we go to Starbucks.
Oh.
Yeah, we've been doing it for 20 years, and Starbucks donates the coffee. We work on using their communication devices, waiting in line, acting appropriately. It's more sort of what, I think more often than not, I'm training the community more than I'm training the students.
Exactly.
And it's just anything else that maybe as a parent you could tell me you wanted.
I want my son to learn how to use the bus.
There are people who do that. But it's always, I've always seen it as my job to help the students be able to fit into those neurotypical environments when they have to, so that you guys get to have fun opportunities.
So I was thinking of some of the functional life skills, and I thought also about money and use of money, but realistically, we rarely even use money. So it got me thinking about A couple of other things, like learning to keep your belongings with you. You know, after you use the Starbucks card, do you leave it on the counter or do you take it back and put it in your wallet? Those kind of things. And then also, I know for my son, a really big skill that we're working on right now is how to physically maneuver when other people are there. You know, learning not to walk in between two people who are talking, or learning to hold the door open for the person behind you, things like that.
In response to your question, I think another thing is when you're in that environment that you don't want to be in, how to occupy yourself and keep yourself kind of busy and adapt to that. Because I know all of us, when we're in the grocery store and there's a long wait, we pull out our phone or we'll read the magazine on the checkout counter. And so with my brother too, it was learning how, when you don't want to be there, what else you can do to make it tolerable.
That is one of the things we're working on is we sit service longer. We don't just get our coffee and leave. We're trying to work on being able to sit in a place and socialize, or at least just sit in the place. You guys can go out to dinner. So, okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Another thought, my son is 16 and he's pretty severely autistic, and one of his respite care workers and ABA workers would take him to Value Village or the dollar store, so he's learning to choose things.
I'm going to try to find new places to go. I go there every day. I just wanted to know if there was more I could teach. Because trust me, I'm out in the community every day. We are a community-based program for severe profound students with autism. So that's not a problem. We're going. It's, if I want to hear from parents. So, because many of my students don't live with parents anymore because their parents have given up. So.
Do we have one more question? Yes, we have one more. Wait for the microphone. Just going to hear you a little bit better.
So I'm a parent of a 6-year-old with autism, and I would just like to say, Ellie, I would like to nominate you for president because we could use a lot more of that positive explanation in this world. And you told those stories with such grace, and it was very great to hear that. And I'm also a sister of a brother who has some psychological challenges, not autism, but just very different. But I still found, even knowing that, when I would get home, there's still days that I want to pummel him. So are there ever, like, do you and Jonah, are you guys typical brother and sister? Like, you get in those arguments? Or is it that empathy's always on kind of high alert to be aware, he's not looking at it the same way I am. He just wants to play with it, so I'm just going to give it to him. Or do you find, like, little areas where you have give and take and then typical sibling behavior?
There are some times when we'll have the casual going back at each other. There are some times when we're just hanging out on our own, just in the same room, just relaxing. And there are some times when we'll totally hang out together, which doesn't happen as often. And sometimes you just kind of gotta adapt to what you find nice to do with what he finds nice to do, and you kind of just work your way into that realm of you two are enjoying something, doing something together, you're both happy, enjoying it. But if he ever angers you or that sort of thing, sometimes either you just kind of gotta be the first person that just steps up and either apologizes or lets the person have it, or just be the one person that kind of rises above, if you must say. But otherwise, you can just either step back, take a little bit of a break, take a breather, but don't just walk away, because that could make them even more angry or even more confused. You just kind of got to adapt to the situation, because it all depends for how it's affecting the situation right then and what the situation really is.
You're amazing.
Ellie, do you ever get angry at Jonah?
Oh, I've plenty of times gotten just as mad at him. I've gotten furious. I've gotten completely confused. But most of the time, you just kind of got to think, he has autism, but that's not always what runs through your mind. The first thing that will run through your mind is, why did he say that? Why can't he just say the right thing? Does he seriously have to say that right then, right now? But not all the times is it going to work out the way that you want it to. Sometimes it's just not going to work in the right way, but other times it'll work just fine, and you, like I said, you just kind of got to adapt to the situation.
I have my two, they're only 16 months apart, and my daughter does not give an inch. She's more stubborn than my son is. They've had physical fights. She texted me last week when I was in New York and said, "Tell him to get away from my door." She doesn't hang out with him. Sometimes they talk about whatever memes they like on the internet, or like they're playing some game on their own devices, and then they'll talk about the game. Forget the name of it, Undertale or something. And but yeah, they don't enjoy hanging out together when we go places together. We're a little family unit, and that's fine. But they don't get along at all, and she never gives in, ever. He gives in.
I just as the mom of Ellie and Jonah, I have a small voice when I'm like this. I probably won't have a voice after this compared to the teacher whose voice I need. Sorry, I need that voice. So with Ellie and with Jonah, I've seen two sides of it that have been really helpful for both of the kids. One is that when Jonah was younger, we really worked with him to learn to ask how our day was. And what that has evolved into for Jonah, my kids are 14 months apart, not even, right? For Jonah, what that's evolved into is a real interest in what we've done with our days. And what that means for Ellie is that Jonah is very attentive to what Ellie is interested in, and he knows her really well. So that's a really cool thing. He always knows what we should get her as a gift. And he's very aware and protective of how we should treat Ellie as well. So that's helpful for Ellie because there's really clear ideas that Jonah is thinking about her, right? On the other hand, Jonah can be in his own world. And that's really a challenge for Ellie. So there are times where I know it's lonelier, right, than you'd like it to be.
Definitely.
But I love to tell this story about Ellie when she was little, and this is why there's harmony in our house, I think. When Ellie was about 2 years of age, Jonah was really into the planets. We could tell you some hysterical stories about the planets, but like at the EEU when they were trying to potty train Jonah, they put Uranus up. And they were trying to get him out of group to go to the bathroom, and he said, "I don't want to see Uranus." I'm sorry. I walked into the EEU that day, and they just were like dying, wanting to tell me, and to make sure I knew it was appropriate what he was saying. So we were good. All right. Love the EEU. Best place. Anyway, Ellie was about 2, and she really wanted to play ball with Jonah. She knew Jonah was into the planets. And we had this Frisbee, we have border collies. We had this Frisbee that had a hole in the middle. And she was trying and trying to get Jonah to roll the ball back, and there was no way. He had zippo interest. So she took the Frisbee and put it over the ball, and she said, "Jonah, Saturn." And she got his attention. So one of the things that she learned is how to use Jonah's interests. And that was the key thing as a sibling, was to be flexible. That's what you were talking about. And at the same time, we try to give her a lot of room. So for parents of siblings, like Ellie's activities are just as important to us as Jonah's. And I know when you were little, I know, there was a lot of therapy. Ellie was a typical peer. She was his partner in speech therapy. But it's really important to have that quality time with your kids who are typical, even if it's 10, 15 minutes a day. So I just wanted to say that as your mom.
I wanted to share something. It's not a question, but because my son has been in therapy and he's been getting support, and he went to a behavior supportive school to child, probably around Christmas, I kind of got fried with how I would ask him to do something and he would do it, and he had this gross teenager pile of dishes on his desk, and finally I yelled at him, which I don't ever do, and he just looked at me and he said, "Well, you're supposed to teach me how to do it. You're supposed to help me build it into my routine." And I was like, "I'm mad, quit being rational." It's like he wants everything to be, just help me add it to my routine and it'll be fine. Just quit telling me to do it randomly. I was like, okay.
I had one young guy tell me in therapy, it was just a few months ago, he said, "I really need for people to show me that I need to step up to the plate and how to do it." So I think that was really important. He was like, I want my parents to set those limits for me. So it's sort of like, even though it may cause a blowout at one time, they'll want you to do it eventually. Because you will ask them eventually. You'll get sick of it and you'll be like, just do
Well,
it.
he just told me Sundays at 4, and then he sets his alarm and does it.
Yeah, yeah. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your time and your questions. Seattle Children's has a wealth of programs, and there are folks here from other programs as well, as you saw at the resource fair. And the best way to check us out is to subscribe. I'm really having problems with the microphones today. Is to subscribe to our blog, which is really cool. And we have lots of things that come out weekly, both for parents and for the kids. But it's a good way to stay in the loop of what we're doing and the different opportunities for your kids and for you. And as well, just reach out if you need us. Thank you.